There are objects in this world that should not exist. Fragments of a forgotten technology so strange that they seem to slip through the cracks of accepted history. Imagine for a moment a leather pouch discovered in the dry dust of a Roman ruin, sealed with beeswax and heavy with a secret. It was not filled with gold coins, sacred ashes, or military decrees, but with something far more volatile and untouchable. We tell ourselves that such stories are merely the poetry of primitive minds, yet the physical reality of the object still haunts the historical record. You can almost feel the weight of it now, resting in a forgotten corner of a museum, challenging the boundary between myth and machinery. If we accept that these chronicles hold even a sliver of truth, we must ask ourselves a deeply uncomfortable question. Did the ancient world possess the terrifying capacity to compress the atmosphere itself into a weapon or a tool? The story echoes from the dusty pages of an epic that has survived the collapse of empires, yet its meaning remains trapped behind a veil of allegory. We are told that Ulysses, the weary wanderer, received this pouch from Aeolus, the keeper of the winds, and that a fatal curiosity doomed his entire fleet. But what if the epic poet was not inventing a fairy tale, but rather translating a technological reality into the only language he possessed? Shadows and fog obscure that distant Mediterranean voyage, where the desperate hands of sailors untied the knot that kept the tempest at bay. Under a canopy of indifferent stars, the escaping wind transformed a calm sea into a shrieking abyss of salt and darkness, dragging the ships back to the shore they had just left. On the surface, it is a cautionary fable about human greed and paranoia. But the relics of the ancient world rarely yield to simple interpretations. This is not merely a philosopher's thought experiment. It is a physical anomaly that forces us to reconsider the lost mechanical genius of our ancestors. To understand the impossibility of the wind bag, we must first walk through the sun-scorched workshops of the Roman Empire, where innovation brushed against the supernatural. The hero of Alexandria built steam-powered spinning spheres and automatic temple doors that seemed to breathe with the will of the gods. Temples were not just houses of prayer. They were intricate machines where hydraulics, vacuum pressure, and hidden bellows created divine illusions. Evidence lies not in the ground, but in the blueprints of the ancient engineers who understood the principles of compression and airtight seals long before the industrial age. Modern critics argue that a leather sack could never contain the pressure of a hurricane, and they are physically correct based on current material science. Yet we keep finding clues that suggest they were not trying to contain a natural hurricane, but something far more subtle and directed. Perhaps the wind was not a chaotic gale, but a highly concentrated, compressed stream of air designed to push a sail or activate a mechanism. The artifact becomes less mythical when you view it not as a weather bomb, but as a portable, ancient pneumatic battery. Where archaeology falls silent, the reconstruction of logical steps begins, filling the gaps with the whispers of natural philosophy. We know the Roman world was obsessed with automating wonder, using the invisible power of air to move heavy objects and intimidate the faithful. The bag of wind fits perfectly into a world of hidden tubes and hissing pressure vessels, a world where science was indistinguishable from sorcery. Why then, if such a device existed, did it not change the course of naval history or the Roman economy? The tragic answer lies in the element of fragile mastery, a secret kept so tightly that it died the moment the ship's locker was breached. If you hold the only copy of a world-changing formula and you are lost at sea, history is not interrupted. It is simply buried in the silt. This brings us to the labyrinth of human error, the part of the legend where the machine outruns its maker. The chronicles say the crew of Ulysses, burning with jealousy, assumed the tightly sealed sack was filled with treasure, loot that their captain was hoarding from them. It is a deeply human moment, a misunderstanding between the visionary who wields the anomaly and the common mind that can only see gold. When they severed the cord and released the trapped atmosphere, they were not releasing a demon. They were short-circuiting a navigational tool, the instant release of potential energy. A whistle of air turning into a roar would have been enough to flatten sails and snap masts in the chaotic feedback loop. To the frightened sailor, the sudden, shrieking vortex felt like the anger of a sky god. But to a modern engineer, the physics are eerily familiar. It is not the magic we should fear, but the catastrophic failure of a pressure vessel in a volatile marine environment. Now we enter the deeper labyrinth of theory, where rational archaeology collides with the terrifying possibility of extraterrestrial interference. A darker hypothesis suggests that we are looking at the evidence incorrectly because we are obsessed with terrestrial origins. If the bag was not a Roman invention but a misinterpreted piece of wreckage from a far older or further source, the complexity shifts dramatically. Some researchers theorize that the myth of Aeolus handing over a physical bag containing a storm describes an encounter with a non-human intelligence. Imagine looking at a high-pressure cylinder or a plasma containment unit through the eyes of a Greek traveler, utterly ignorant of advanced metallurgy. You would not see a machine. You would see a leathery membrane, swelling with energy, hissing with the breath of a trapped spirit. This is not to say that aliens guide our sailing ships, but that the translation of a high-tech object into a mythic symbol follows a consistent psychological pattern. The wind inside could have been an exotic fuel, a gas lighter than hydrogen, or a levitation agent dense enough to push a trireme against the current. We must stare into the abyss of time and admit that human civilization might be a palimpsest, written over the ashes of technologies we refuse to recognize. The boundary between a hard fact and a desperate speculation becomes so thin here that it feels like standing on a crumbling cliff over a foggy ocean. The physical evidence for the bag of wind remains stubbornly absent from the fossil record, which is exactly what you would expect from a non-metallic, organic device. Leather rots, wax melts, and compressed gases dissipate. All that remains is a story carved into stone or passed down by campfires, distorting with every telling. The mainstream historian will point to the allegory and close the case, satisfied that the problem is purely a moral one about greed. But the artifact whispers a contradiction. Because ancient allegories were often storage boxes designed to protect dangerous truths from the uninitiated. The silence in the archaeological strata is not a denial of existence. It is a testament to the fragility of lightweight, high-science instruments. We are left holding a paradox, a narrative so specific and mechanically vivid that it seems to describe a real object supported by zero physical remains. Stand in the hold of an imagined Roman galley, the air thick with the smell of tar, wet wool, and human anxiety. Something is indeed glowing faintly under a bench, a bloated object pulsing with the rhythm of the trapped energy inside it, the most valuable item on board. The terror did not come from the object itself, but from the human inability to leave a mystery alone. That terror is the only part of the puzzle that truly survived, a cautionary echo that still chills the spine during a dark night at sea. Why would humanity possess such a pressurized secret, only to lose it in the foam of a single disastrous voyage? The answer takes us deep into the psychology of obsession, to the lonely figures who try to reach back through time and reclaim the fire. There have always been isolated inventors, the forgotten Da Vincis of the Bronze Age, who bent physics but failed to build an economic system around it. They died anonymous, their fragile pneumatic satchels rotting in a shipwreck or buried in a landslide, taking the precise cure for gravity with them. The human element is the most painful part of this mystery. The realization that genius often arrives long before the society is ready to safely house it. We obsess over the lost bag because it represents our collective regret, the sinking feeling that we have fallen from a technical grace we no longer understand. For the investigators searching for the bag, the quest is a slow madness, a hunt for a sealed container in a world of infinite open spaces. Every stumbled upon scrap of ancient leather in a deep desert dig raises the pulse, only to crumble into silent disappointment upon contact with the air. To seek the wind is to try to clutch the breath of a ghost. You cannot catch it, but you feel the cold draft of its passing on your face. Listen now to the steady, mechanical tick of the ancient clockwork of human memory, a mechanism grinding down the truth into finer, more seductive dust. The bag of wind is the ultimate symbol of this decay, because the very substance it contained was the agent of its own disappearance. Once the seal was broken, the evidence vanished. The crime scene was swept clean by the very thing that was being held captive. There is a comfort in believing history is a solved puzzle until you stand at the edge of this silence, staring at a rusted compass pointing nowhere. We are not so different from the greedy crew, convinced that a physical truth must be a heavy, tangible treasure when it might actually be thin air. We have more data than ever, yet the mystery remains as untouchable as a whirlwind, and just as dangerous to stare into for too long. Perhaps the final twist is that we have been carrying the bag of wind all along, inside the vessel of our own skulls. It is a story trapped under pressure, trying to expand and push us toward a truth we are not yet ready to open our hands and accept. The Mediterranean sun still warms the crumbling stones, and the sea still echoes with a mechanical roar that sounds suspiciously like a sudden, unnatural gale. Time has compressed the facts into a diamond-hard myth, and we lack the proper tools to cut the surface and release the light. The human obsession never fades. It just shifts from the physical dig site to the shadowy corners of the theoretical page where all impossible things wait. Every now and then, a storm hits a quiet coast with no warning, spinning the weather vanes into a frantic dance, and our minds flicker back to that sealed leather pouch. We are approaching the eternal fade now, the point where the inner abyss of our ignorance opens wider than the physical sea. To look at the Roman bag of wind is to admit that we are cosmic amnesiacs, wandering through a museum of echoes we cannot source. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent, carrying far heavier pressures and winds that would shatter our solar system into glass. Somewhere between the carving on a temple wall and the silent decay of an apparatus at the bottom of the sea lies the absolute final truth. It is not a pastoral, comfortable truth. It is a cold, existential draft that seeps through the seams of our reality. We conceptualize the future as an upward climb, but sometimes, when you drop a stone into a deep Roman well, the sound comes back from the past. The bag of wind may have been a tool for a journey we are still trying to finish, a voyage that requires mastering the invisible forces that push us back. You cannot hold the atmosphere in your fist, but you can feel its resistance. That pushback is the shape of the lost science. Ancient stone has preserved the anger of kings and the whims of gods, but it has failed to preserve the subtle hiss of a leaking pressure seal. We are left not with a technology, but with a question that acts like a relentless engine, driving us to explore the uncharted boundaries of physics. The shadows and fog that obscure the Odyssey are the same shadows that cloud our own future. The mist of time is a two-way mirror. Where the abyss of history meets the stars of human potential, there is a thin, sharp horizon, and the bag of wind rests just beyond that edge. You will not find it in a display case, but you might hear it on a quiet night in the sudden breath of air that stirs the curtains when no window is open. The limits of our knowledge remain the walls of the labyrinth, and somewhere inside that darkness the storm is still raging, waiting for a vessel strong enough to hold it.